Hello, how's everybody feeling? Here it is, our recipe for KFC, Kentucky Fried Cauliflower. We have been serving this dish here since we changed the menu over to vegan back in 2015. It's everybody's favorite dish, and we've picked up lots of little tips and tricks along the way to make it super delicious. So what I've got here is one medium-sized head of cauliflower broken up into pieces. So you just want to break it up into rustic type chunks. It's a good idea to leave on little pieces of the stem, and even little bits of the leaf taste really delicious at the end as well. So if you just do it in a really rough kind of way, however you like. Now, the trick to making this dish really delicious is that you need to roast the cauliflower beforehand. It needs to be cooked. If you were to crumb and fry this raw, it just wouldn't have the same flavor. Raw cauliflower really doesn't taste as nice as roasted. And if you were to boil the cauliflower beforehand, it just takes on too much water. So you definitely need to cook the cauliflower beforehand, and roasting is the best way. So I've just got a baking tray here. I'm gonna use a little bit of spray oil and a little bit of salt at this point as well. So we're just gonna put all that on the tray. Only a little bit of oil here. So because this is a fried dish, there's gonna be quite a lot of oil at the end. So we just want a very light spray of oil here. You can even leave the oil out. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put it in the oven about 180 until you just get those little brown edges, that yummy caramelization, but until it's not too soft. So we want just a little bit of firmness left and just those yummy roasted edges. Okay, we're going to go put it in the oven. Okay, while our cauliflower is roasting, we're going to make up our wet and our dry mix that we're going to use to crumb the cauliflower. So we've got 2 bowls. You will need 2 bowls because we're going to go from the wet mix into the dry mix. So what I've got here is flour in both bowls. I'm going to put the amounts in the comments of the video, so don't worry too much about that now. So this one's going to be our wet mix. I've got a whisk in there ready because basically the glue, the wet mix, is just flour and water. So the amounts are in the comments, like I said. Flour and water, we're just going to whisk it together. In the dry mix bowl goes our spices. So we start with some flour. We're going to add chicken stock powder. So I've talked about this before. There are a lot of brands of chicken stock powder that are vegan, so make sure you use a vegan one, obviously. So we're going to put that in first. We've got smoked paprika and sweet paprika, onion powder, garlic powder, celery salt, sage. So all of the spices in this are dried. So if you grow herbs in your backyard, you can't really use fresh spices in this. We've got some marjoram, oregano, thyme, mustard powder. So that's just a mild mustard powder, not a spicy one. Ground pepper. I like to use white pepper. If you want to use black pepper, that's fine too, but just make sure it's a sort of a fine grind. And then we're just going to put a little bit of salt, not too much because our stock powder has salt, and we've also got the celery salt as well. So that's all of our spices. And before I whisk the water into my wet one, I'm just going to mix all those spices in together. Now, one little tip when we're doing this is that you can't really over spice it. So be generous. Like, don't worry too much about, it being too spicy. It's not a thing, okay? So just go over the top with the spices. That's what makes it really yummy. So we're just going to mix that in. That's our dry mix. If you like, and you don't mind the taste of raw flour, you can taste that. Now, I quite often do that, taste that for salt. Okay, so we've got our dry mix. All the spices are all combined, and then we're just going to make our wet mix. So I've got the amounts in the comments. We're just going to whisk while we pour the water in. It just helps to not get too many lumps that way. And we're just going to make basically like a food glue. Quite often people ask what you replace eggs with when you're crumbing things. Just flour and water. You don't need the eggs. The eggs are not really important at all. You really just want a liquid to stick everything, and flour and water works really well. Another point with this recipe is that it works completely fine with gluten-free flour. So if you can't eat gluten, then use gluten-free flour mix, just like a generic gluten-free flour mix. It doesn't really matter which one. All right, so there we go. We've got our wet mix and our dry mix. Okay, our cauliflower is out of the oven. As you can see, we've just got little bits of brown on the edges, but it's not too soft. It's still got a little bit of firmness to it. So that's the sort of level of cooked that we want. Okay, so we've got our wet mix and our dry mix that we prepared earlier. Now to do this, you want to remember to use 2 different hands for 2 different mixes. So keep one hand for your wet mix always and one hand for your dry mix always, and then you won't get super messy and you won't get too much of the wet stuff mixed up in the dry stuff. So we're going to take a piece of cauliflower, toss it around in the wet mix. Now it's a good idea to pick up a little bit of dry mix, dump it in, and then push it on top. So that way our hand never gets too wet and we're able to keep that hand dry. It is fairly important to do each piece individually. You can dump it all into the wet mix, but make sure you crumb each piece individually. If you get too much, if it clumps up too much, you get little bits of uncooked crumb mix once you chuck it in the fryer. While I'm doing this, I just want to talk about frying. So if you're cooking this at home and you want to be a little bit more healthy, because I know people like to be healthy when they're at home, it's not going to taste the same unless you deep fry it. I'm really sorry to say. And if you don't have a deep fryer at home, it is totally fine to deep fry in a pot. You have to be super careful, make sure your kids aren't around. Like it is pretty dangerous just deep frying in a pot at home. But if you are confident in doing that, just fill up a pot with some oil, and you want to make sure that the oil is the right temperature. It doesn't fall below 150 degrees Celsius, so make sure you've got a temperature or a thermometer on hand, and you want it around about between 180 to 190 degrees Celsius while you're frying. So that's a good guide. You'll also, if you do just a couple of bits at a time, if you're deep frying in a pot, because you know, if you don't have a commercial deep fryer, then it's going to lose temperature fairly quickly. So you just want to do a couple of bits at a time. If you are super keen on trying to recreate this recipe without frying it, you could spray it with some oil and maybe air fry it. Let me know how you go with that. It'll work. It just won't be the same as what you have when you come here. So this is one of those recipes where it's just accidentally a little bit healthier because it's plants and not meat. But it's not a healthy recipe. It's super delicious, but it's not gonna, you can't sort of make it healthy and have it taste the same. It's just not possible, unfortunately. Depending on the size of your cauliflower, because there's sort of variation in obviously in sizes of cauliflowers, you may have some crumb mix left over. Hopefully you don't have not enough. I've sort of been generous with the amounts when I've put them down. But if you have some left over, keep it in a container, don't throw it away, and you can use it to crumb all kinds of things. One of my personal favorites is potatoes. Kentucky Fried Potatoes. Super delicious. Give it a try. Foam meats you can crumb with this. It's just super tasty. Or if you want to save it and use it for cauliflower another time, yeah, totally do that. It will keep, especially if you strain out any of the chunky bits, it'll keep, the flour mix will keep for quite a while. Okay, there it is, our KFC. We've served it here with chipotle aioli. We've also done a recipe video for that. Should be up on our YouTube channel. Let us know how you go cooking this one, and get in touch if you need any tips or tricks. I'm just gonna eat this now. Yum. Oh, do better.